Okay, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. This is another installment of the bi-weekly SIG CLI. Today is December 18th. And today we are going to devote into 118 planning. I have not checked the calendar, but let me quickly do it because if I remember correctly, the next call of ours in 2 weeks is literally on the January 1st, which basically means the next meeting will actually be held on the 15th of January. I'm going to cancel the meeting on the 1st. I doubt that anyone will be interested in talking with the rest of the group on January 1st, but rather folks will be enjoying the first day of the new year. So with that, I think we can jump to the main topic, which is the 118 planning. I see that Lee is not here, but I can talk about the first item. I don't see Himanshu either on the call, so I'll probably cover the first two items. So the first one is about adding an alpha command debug. Lee has been working on ephemeral containers for quite a while, and he started putting together a proposal for expanding or building on top of the ephemeral containers, but being able to have a separate command that will allow us to debug containers and inject some debugging tools, and the image, whatever you'll be interested in injecting, will be yet another flag to the command. I left their initial comments that instead of just using the ephemeral containers, we can build a much featureful command with either being, the user could be either picking whether he wants to use a ephemeral containers or a regular pod. I do hope that we will be able to get agreement on the proposal. It was discussed heavily in the past meetings, so we have an agreement on the shape of it. We just need to write it down, and I do hope that we will be able to put together an initial alpha implementation of this command into the kubectl within the 118 timeframes. I see, Phil, you left some comments with regard to it.
Yeah, I just left a comment that we're building out like surface area and customize for commands that would otherwise be in kube control, but we can iterate faster on, and then we have a simpler packaging story than the plugins, I think. So we may want to add it there as well. I'll talk about more about that at the end here.
Okay. Yeah, that's one option, or we can still, let's talk it through further on. Does anyone have any questions with regards to this particular item that we were working on during the 118 timeframes? If people are interested in helping both with the proposal or implementation, just reach out to me or Lee, and hopefully we will be able to direct you in the right place. Okay, the next one is also coming from enhancements that people were trying to add to kubectl, namely kubectl get that was specifically targeted at the get events. And we figure out that instead of adding a functionality to the get command, which is already pretty big and would make get harder to grasp because you would have a different behavior depending on which resources you were working on, and that would not be a good user experience, we decided to create a separate command, entirely separate command to work with the events command. Adus Himanshu put together a proposal for the new command, again, additional new command for the events that will be much more featureful than the current get. the current get is very limited. You can get either all events or events from a particular namespace, like with any regular get resource, whereas we would want to have some more filtering and sorting capabilities added into that command. All the details we are trying to collect into the proposal that is linked in the agenda document, in the agenda. I do hope that we'll get the time and try to get the at least the proposal in for 118. I'm not sure how far we will be able to go with the implementation. And again, if someone is interested in either providing some feedback on the enhancements itself, or helping with the enhancements, or with the actual implementation later on, feel free to reach out to myself or Himanshu, and we will get you directed at the right place. Are there any questions to this item? Okay, so the next one is our long-lived process that Sean, and big thanks to Sean for doing this for the past couple of months. Sean is driving the extraction of kubectl to staging. We're pretty much seeing the light in the tunnel. There are only a few leftovers. Sean, can you give a quick update where we are, how far we are? I remember one of the main offenders is the auth reconcile. I had a discussion with Jordan during KubeCon. We had an agreement that either I'm gonna continue the work that he started on extracting the auth library.
Hey, Sean, can you mute?
Or the other option is I'm gonna copy the code and ensure that the code that will be in kubectl staging and within the main repo does not diverge. Whichever solution will be faster for me to finish, we will go with that. And that's the agreement that I have with Jordan. I'll try to go with the library approach, because obviously the library approach would be the long term. The other, although seems simpler, it will have a limited life cycle, because at some point in time we'll have to eventually fix the library code. Sean, you want to add something?
Sure. Yeah. So there's two commands, kubectl subcommands that haven't been pulled out of Kubernetes core. The first, as you mentioned, is the kubectl auth reconcile, and there's one dependency on the RBAC, which is exactly what Maciej's been discussing. And we believe the long-term answer is to pull that dependency into its own repository so that it can be reused. But so in addition, it would be outside of Kubernetes core. The second is kubectl convert, which because it converts and conversions go through internal objects or internal versions of objects, the convert can never be fixed. And so our resolution for that is that we're going to create a second, create it as a standalone binary so that the functionality will still exist. However, it won't be in kube control. It'll be probably a binary called convert or something similar. If you've got opinions on that, please let me know. I've already gotten something along the lines of that working. It's pretty straightforward. We just need to figure out kind of what the flags or some of the very simple interface stuff is going to work, but that's all we have left. Actually, that's not 100% true. We have a couple of other pieces that are still in Kubernetes core that can easily be moved out once we have those two pieces out, specifically kubectl copy, which was moved back into core because of the security problems with it. We didn't want anybody reusing that. But we will be moving that into staging once everything else is moved out and once we're happy that those security issues won't be reused. So that's that. Any questions? Cool, thanks.
Okay, awesome. The next one is from Julian. I do hope I pronounce your name correctly, and Antoine, and it's about supporting API server dry run in kubectl, which we covered shortly last time. You guys want to talk us through the detail?
Yeah, this is Julian. So we merged the KEP for the plan to use the dry run flag for kubectl. Yeah, thanks for your help for merging that. The plan is to start explicitly warning users that you must now set a value for dry run. So currently you don't need to set a value for dry run, but that would allow us to get to a path where users would explicitly set dry run equals client or dry run equals server for the type of dry run. So we're going to work on that. And I think besides that, there's documentation and tests left.
I've noticed you had a PR open, and it consists of close to 40 or more than 40 comments, or it was 38 comments and 44 files changed. Do you think you can split this out into a smaller pieces so that it'll be easier for review? I started looking at it, but I freaked out a little bit because of the size. It is definitely easier for me to spend time on smaller bits as long as they make sense together and they don't break the integrity of the functionality. I'm perfectly fine.
Yeah, for sure. I can do that.
Cool.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Because I like I'm telling, I freaked out when I was prepping the agenda, and I've seen that one. It is harder for sure to review bigger PRs, and that was like the first thing that I wanted to get from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Will do.
Thank you very much. Okay. Does anyone have any questions to Julian or Antoine?
Actually, I had just one quick question, which was slightly tangential, just because I was digging into that code recently. So does the dry run for the server dry run, is that only available if server side apply is available? In other words, is it connected to server side apply, the server side dry run?
No, it's absolutely not. And the thing is, we're doing this effort because we are promoting dry run to GA, even though server-side apply is not going GA.
Sean, did that answer your question?
It did. Thanks a lot,
Okay.
Antoine.
Cool. Are there any other questions with regards to the API server dry run? Cool. The next topic, I put it here as a tangential. I'm not sure if or how far we get with it. I have an initial agreement from the SIG API machinery folks with regards to tracking the headers of tracking the commands that are being invoked in the server. So with the overall approach that we are trying to increase the monitoring capabilities of the entire Kubernetes cluster, Phil put together a proposal a couple months back, which is discussing the ability to inject the commands and some parameters from the commands, and the proposal enlists which specifically we would want to see, and then they will be sent over to the server, and then the server can create the metrics, and the metrics, based on those metrics, we could then get a feedback which commands are being used and what kind of parameters are people most frequently passing over to them. This could provide us with valuable information about the most frequently used commands. Currently, the only data that we have is either through grabbing through scripts available in the internet and looking for the kubectl commands, or gathering direct feedback from users either through surveys or something similar. Which also reminds me that the SIG's user experience will be conducting a survey about the overall user experience of a Kubernetes. I want to sync with them with regards to the kubectl part and get the results, at least in the area that we are interested in. Not sure how far I'm not sure how far we will be able to get within 1.18. It might be something that will span more than the current release, but I think it's worthy to start this work. Does anyone have any questions with regard to this one?
Yeah, this would also be, it would be great to get us some data. There's also various things that we can do that would be interesting with this, such as we can, for commands we're deprecating, we can send as part of the header that a deprecated command is being used, and then the API sort of like, a user could, in theory, stall a service into their cluster that could look at the logs to see if they're using deprecated commands, and then have like cluster admins be aware of this, or so, like allow organizations to have more awareness over things they need to make, right? Like, so then the organization could roll out a new version of kube control or something like that, or tell their users to switch. So there's a lot of useful stuff that can be done here. That's all.
Yeah, definitely. There's kind of data we are currently missing, and they definitely will be valuable to us as the developers, and as well as the orgs or the cluster administrator, just like Phil mentioned. Okay, so we're down to customized alpha commands. Phil.
Great. Yeah. So we started building a number of commands in Kustomize on top of this set of libraries called the KYAML libraries. And these commands are, the idea is that like these are useful CLI commands, and instead of putting them in kube control, which has a long release cycle, and it just has a lot more going on, like there's a much faster iteration cycle in Kustomize, you can just go get it. And so they're enabled with a flag, or sorry, an environment variable to enable the alpha commands. And if you run Kustomize, you'll see them, the latest version of Kustomize. And then I can give a demo at the end of one of the commands that exists here is a setter command, a replacement for the kube control set commands that is data driven and can be more finely tuned per collection of resources. So I can demo that at the end if there's time. Any questions on that? Great. That's also a great area to be contributing to, I think. The barrier to entry is much lower. Like you can run the tests locally on your machine, and the reviews are a lot faster turnaround there. All right, Frank, speaking of alpha commands.
So hi, this is Frank. I wanted to discuss that pull request, which essentially generalizes existing docs for customized config run and makes it more of an RFC style specification for creating what we call configuration functions. And if you're not familiar, at very high level, we're following kind of a Unix philosophy for creating small composable client-side programs for manipulating declarative configurations. And kind of the idea here is that customized config run would be a reference implementation of a reference implementation for orchestration of these configuration functions. But we could implement both the functions and the orchestrations in any toolchain or any framework or any language. So if you're interested, please take a look, and I'd love to hear comments on that.
Yeah, a little more background on this is part of one of those alpha commands in Customize, and there's a subset of tools which don't need access to the local file system, for instance, and don't need access to network or types of operations, and don't need direct access to your console and this sort of stuff. And really what these the operations do is manipulate resources, right? So the set, for instance, could fall into this, right? Where all it needs to do is read a set of resources, change them, and then write them out. And so it's possible to write like plugins for these in a much safer way, right? Because they don't require access to any of those things. You could safely run a piece of code that just reads from standard in and writes to standard out. And use a Docker container, for instance, to get that bit of code instead of having to install a binary that might be trusted or might not be. And so this is about those sorts of operations and what should the interface be for them. And one thing to note is that this is very similar to what controllers do on the server side. Like they read resources and write them, but it's basically about changing declarative configuration or for some class of controllers. And so this may, if you're interested in either one of those things, this is a good place to look.
Any questions? Cool, thank you.
Okay. So the next item on the list is Sean with kubectl apply refactor.
So I wanted to bring up to our community this refactor, just to make sure that everybody knows about this as it's happening. We've moved, as we mentioned before, we've moved quite a bit of code to staging, and now it's actually available and should be available to be reused as libraries. And so we've already refactored, made pretty significant refactors to the drain code, the kubectl drain code, so that it can be reused. And so this is an effort to start the ball rolling to get the kubectl apply refactored so that it can be reusable. So initially, in fact, before this PR, our kubectl apply code was actually quite challenging and somewhat unmaintainable, just because it's one big massive chode of code. And so this actually does not change any functionality, or at least that's the goal. All it's doing is trying to reorganize and actually put in a couple of extra touch points into the code, a pre-process callback function and a post-process callback function, which will allow people who reuse this code to be able to do something before they apply and do something after they apply. And so, yeah, I'd love to get your feedback on any of that. And in addition, if there's ideas on other code that should be refactored to make it more reusable, just please bring this up in our meetings, and let's actually, you know, we've got the opportunity now to turn this code into reusable libraries. So let's do that. And apply especially is one of the biggest things that we have. And so this is just a beginning in order to make this code more reusable. Thanks. And if you get any questions, yeah, does anybody have any questions?
I do have a question. I think it's a little bit out of turn though. This is my first SIG CLI meeting, so I'm not
No,
sure
no worries.
how it works. So can I just ask,
Sure.
how and where does someone raise something? Is the intention to add something to the agenda before the call?
Yeah. So Mache will be able to give you the definitive answer, but my take is, you know, I just put something on the agenda, and
It's not process heavy.
yeah.
Yeah, you are
Okay.
free to add stuff onto the agenda at any point in time. As long as we're fine with timing, we can go over your topic towards the end of the meeting.
Add it to
Okay,
the
thanks.
end, not the beginning.
Yeah, okay, so I'll add it to the end, and I'm sorry for jumping in the middle. I don't know if I've lost everyone's train of thought, but I'll go do that now. Thanks.
No worries, and welcome, most importantly.
Thank you.
So does
Any
anyone
questions
have
on
any
apply?
questions with regards to the apply refactor, or most importantly, does anyone have any suggestions which other parts of the kubectl should be refactored? I remember that I have a big fat to-do on my never-ending to-do list to refactor overall state of the packages inside of kubectl. And the reason for that is over time we gain some unnecessarily baggage here and there, and we could probably try to straighten a few things along the way. Some of the changes are from the times when we were switching from internal APIs to external APIs, so you might encounter packages that are called versioned, internal, and similar. If I get the time, and hopefully a bit closer to the holidays, and with less additional work, I might be able to get to it and try to clean a few bits. And I already apologize, everyone, if I mess your PR on the road to this, because I might touch quite a bit of the directories on the way to clean the structure. Okay, moving then to the next topic. I see that Eddie has a kubectl bug scrub idea. Eddie, want to talk about it?
Yeah, thanks, Mache. So in attempting to find ways to really get involved with SIG CLI,
Hold on, Eddie. Can you bump your volume slightly a little bit? I barely can hear you.
Yeah, on the mic.
Yeah.
Or just talk louder.
I changed my mic. How is that?
It is better.
Okay. So in attempting to find ways to get involved with SIG CLI, the easiest barrier to entry I saw was like jumping into triaging a bunch of GitHub issues. So I jumped into the standalone kubectl repo. A lot of the issues that I was digging through, especially the most recent ones, are just a bunch of like user error, like misunderstanding things. And I know the API machinery team, I think they meet twice a week to just like get together and triage a bunch of GitHub issues. So I think one of the things that I ran into is I don't have a lot of domain knowledge yet into helping debug some of these things. So I wanted to propose maybe getting together like, once a week or on the off week where we don't have a meeting, and maybe just like trying to go through issues for like 30 minutes together.
I mean, I'm trying to cut the number of meetings of not adding additional ones. And And from the past, I know that there are some meetings where we don't fill in the entire hour. Can we start by devoting, let's say, half of the current SIG CLI meetings, or 1/3, let's say, and go through those issues to start with, so that we don't multiply the meetings? If we see that there are more issues or something like that, or we prove this is working fine, we can then rethink the idea of having a separate meeting.
Yeah, why don't we do like we can plan a soft, like at the end of the SIG CLI meeting, we can leave the Zoom running, and then say till like 10:30 or however long anyone wants to stay on. We can do the we can have anyone who wants to do the scrub like opt in together there.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
That would be reasonable. It just I don't want to multiply the amount of meetings. So maybe if there is room within the current one, or like Phil said, overflow over the assigned. I think we have about 50 minutes to an hour.
Sean, would you add something to that on the agenda or something for next week, just so we don't forget, and we can do it?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah,
I just had one quick, yeah, so I really like the idea of a structured bug scrub, however we do it, whenever we do it, wherever we do it, even if we did it over Slack, I don't care, but we're almost certainly not spending the resources that we need, you know, myself included, to address these issues. And they most of them rot, to be honest.
We could also use that time to do a PR scrub and just go through PRs that have been rotting as well.
Yeah, definitely. Eddie, if you're willing to prepare, let's say, a bunch of several issues and PRs that you think that are laying around and haven't been touched by nobody from the SIG CLI team, from both ends of the spectrum, meaning the super easy ones where you think it's just a user error, but you're not 100% sure. Find a couple of those, find the bigger ones where there is an actual issue. We can go and discuss through several of them. And then if you can somehow track our progress, let's call it that way, so that we know which were triage and which not, that will definitely help us untangle the load of bugs, because like Sean said, and I'm as well as guilty as anyone else of not doing this promptly.
Cool. I'll try to get a collection together, and I guess I'll just break out a different agenda sub item for it for the next meeting.
Awesome. Thanks very much. That will be definitely very helpful.
Cool.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Phil, with your demo.
Okay. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, let me
You'll have to cancel yours. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I just did.
Appreciated. Right now, I just need to figure out how to share this. Sorry, it's asking me for like permissions to do this. All right, hold on, I'll be right back. It's asking me to quit Zoom. This is weird.
Okay, we can see your screen. But I think you're muted, Phil.
How was that? Better?
Better.
Okay. Yeah, I upgraded Mac and now it wants totally different permissions for Zoom. Okay, so what I'm going to demo is just like some of the work we've been doing in Customize. So specifically a set command for like the equivalent of the setters in kubectl, but a little more flexible. So there's this customize config command with a number of things in here. And I just cloned the examples directory from Kubernetes examples, specifically the CockroachDB subdirectory. And so I can run customize tree on this thing, and it will kind of print out the contents of it. So for reference, this is like the configuration in here. And so I can ask it for kind of a view that has specific fields printed out under what. And I can run customize set on this directory. And it will show me this one setter for image tag, which you can see is listed in that tree. So I can set image tag, for instance, to the 1.1.3. And then it will show me that it's been changed here. And then in the tree, it'll show me that it's been changed as well. And the way this has been implemented is by a comment on that field here. And so it basically says, here's a name of something that's a string. The current value is this. And here's like a possible marker to use for doing substitutions. And so this enables that field to be substituted. And so if I wanted to add a new one, for instance, I wanted to have the port. I want like these 8080 ports to be able to settable. I could do something like CockroachDB. Oops. So I do set create CockroachDB ATP port, and then I give it like the current value. And then I give it a type, which is an int. And tell me I did something wrong. Oh, and the field. Sorry. So the field here in this case is port. And then I'd also want to do the field container port, since that's since it's in both the container name is container port and then the service port is port. So now if I do customize config set on that directory, typo. You can see that has the HTTP port here as a possible value. These don't have owners, so another thing you can do is add owners. So I'm going to go ahead and set that value. So this time I'm going to change it to HTTP port. I'm going to change the value to 8081, and then maybe I'll add a, I can't remember if it's set by or owned by. What is the value here? Well, I'll drop that for now until I figure out what the flag is. And so you can now see the port's been updated in all those locations. So this is like an extensible way of providing setters for arbitrary fields, and it can support both like partial values, like the tag, for instance, just substituting the part of the image tag, or doing the whole value. Supports the parsing the correct type, and it supports setting, for instance, different different fields and different resources. So you can have a setter for, your foo deployment and your bar deployment, separate setters. And you can set fields together, right? In this case, the ports field, the container port field in the stateful set image and the or container and the service port field here. So that's a quick demo of that command. Again, these are explorations. What we're trying to do is quickly develop prototypes that people can use to say, yes, I like this, no, I don't like this, on things that have been long-standing problems and that we do have solutions for that are just insufficient. And these are actually a great way to get contributing. If you're looking for areas you can jump in and you want to contribute code, because they're alpha, we don't have to spend quite as much time debating like what should the long-term API, what is the consequence of choosing this particular value for the flag as the default, or this name of the flag, is it consistent with everything else? Like those sorts of questions that we typically spend a lot of time on, we can spend a little less time on when contributing here. That's all.
Cool. Is it all right to ask questions at this point?
Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. Is it okay if you share your screen again one more time? I just had a thought about the comments that you're adding to the customization files, or rather to the manifests.
I closed that window, but I can bring up another copy.
Okay, cool. So I guess just for context, hi everyone, my name's Tyler. I've been using Kustomize in production on a vehicle telematics platform that supports roughly 1 million vehicles for the past 2 years. And quickly ran into lots of issues around variable assignments and things like that. But speaking specifically to this feature addition, like looking at the way you've modified the manifest YAML file to include comments, to me looks just like Helm, which is what I ran Screaming from, because primarily, like, it's awesome that this supports a substitution that makes it really easy to go in and make that change. But the reality is, I believe that if you're going to be consuming this from upstream, then you are dependent on a new implicit API of like the name of the substitution that the maintainer of a YAML you don't control chose. If you need to substitute something they haven't put in a comment in for, that needs to be like PR'd upstream and added to that. And ultimately, in the end, when you consider all the possible use cases, every single YAML file is going to be filled with one line of comments for every single thing that has to be replaced forever. And we already have a solution that provides this, which doesn't require any of that, which is this is structured data already. Just make up JSON patch and replace it, and it works fantastic. It actually solves every single use case that I've ever had for modifying any YAML. So what is this adding?
So thanks for that feedback. This is not to solve your problem. So you have a solution that works for you, right?
Yes.
And that's and so there's a couple things I think to key on. One is some people want a CLI to see what options they can set and then set them from some field, right, or some place, right? So let's say I'm getting a value from a G-Cloud. Right? That's where I get the thing. I would have to set that into the declarative file, right? Now you said, hey, there's a patch, but how do you get that patch updated from a value from another source, for instance, right? So people use setters. We already have support for this. You obviously don't use them. So you obviously wouldn't use this.
Yes, but the setters that we have thus far are based on the structured data that we know about the YAML itself. Like if you're saying that people routinely need to replace container ports, I agree that there should be a setter method for that, but the idea that it is implicitly defined in the YAML itself individually for that particular manifest and could potentially be different in every single manifest throughout the internet, to me seems like missing the point of the standardization that's available through structured data. So if it turns out that like container ports are a thing that need to be modified routinely, wouldn't it make more sense to make that a standard that applies to every single manifest and every single possible object that itself has a container port? So there's a standard way to do that no matter where it came from?
Maybe. I welcome, like, you can go build that solution, like come up with, I think you put some proposals out for that. I think, again, like, I am not, there's a one true way of doing everything. Like, I am not a, you have to write in Java guy, every other language is bad, right? Or you have to write
Oh,
in
I agree. I'm only speaking
And
to the
so-
basic, I'm speaking to the basic tenet that's broadcast on the main page of customize and
Well,
has been, it's a party line that's been drawn for the last 2 years, which is that inline templating is bad and wrong, and we're trying to solve that without doing that. Is
So
that
I
not
think
the case anymore?
Well, it's important to understand a couple things.
Okay.
One, this is not, so building, we have to look at the CLI surface holistically, right? So in customize, in customize build, in the customization YAML, that is still the party line,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Now, generally, why do we say templating is bad and substitution is bad? There's a reason. It's not just like dogma, right?
I agree.
And the reason is that tools cannot, if you template something, tools cannot analyze it. They cannot look and say, is this value good, right? They cannot parse it. I cannot write something in Java.
No static analysis possible when you're full of some other DSL that you just invented.
So
Makes
the
total
question
sense.
is, can a tool look at this file and do static analysis on it? And yes, they can, right? The tool can look this, it will parse. You can run kubeval against this. It'll either validate or it won't, right? And if they don't modify it, and let's say I run the substitution command and I'm pulling a value from some other source, right? That I would otherwise have to set into the file, right? In this case, like I just I'm part of a legacy system. It spits out some value, which is the new release thing that gets applied as a label. And I want to change a particular label that has my release that I get from someplace else. This actually provides a structured way that adheres more closely to those principles, because this is actually attaching metadata to that field. This is something that would be an open API, for instance. Like open API could have this same data. The problem is it's hard to package that schema data, open API, with the file, with the configuration itself, right? So I can consider this less like a templating arbitrary substitution perspective and more like how can we merge the sort of data that we would want to get from the schema and open API into the configuration, right? And there's some stuff that actually open API wouldn't necessarily even, there's some stuff we need to figure out, like how does open API allow you, like, so you can, for instance, it'd be very possible to say, I want to substitute this value into this particular resource, but not that other resource. But when I substitute it into this one resource, it has to like, there's a reference to this other field and that one has to be updated, right? So you can have these complex relationships. And so that needs to be embedded in the schema as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like you're saying, if I can repeat this back, my understanding is that you're saying we can't get these annotations into Open API, so this is an end run around that to explore what those annotations might look like, and someday they could live there? Or
partially, I think it's more, well, again, we are going for a spectrum and building a spectrum holistic collection of solutions. And the reason we want to do that approach, right, is if we do not do that, when someone has a different problem than the one that you've targeted your solution to, but it kind of looks like the thing you're trying to solve, they're going to try to shoehorn your solution into solving their problem, and it's going to make it worse, right? And so what we want to do is we want to say, okay, there's a spectrum of problems, and we are going to make sure that the solutions we develop for each one of those problems is well targeted to that particular problem, rather than saying there's one true solution and everything has to either.
Oh, I agree that I totally agree with the idea of implicit modification versus declarative modification and supporting both in a holistic way. I think just speaking specifically to this implementation, maybe because it's alpha, now isn't the time to talk about it, but like you're calling this thing HTTP port, which is duplicating the fact that it's already named HTTP and it's already under a field called HTTP port. Like this to me just looks like, personally from my experience, like a maintenance nightmare that's going to sprawl out into everything to solve a problem that's like the underlying replacement that you're trying to make, there's already a functioning solution for that doesn't require this, that you could expose in the CLI. And I hear you saying, like, go implement that. And that makes perfect sense to me. You're the one working on it. You do what you're going to do. I will say that for me personally, I'm not highly incentivized to contribute to customize because I spent about 3 months with another contributor trying to get a feature in that was ultimately just closed and ignored and not reviewed. So while I do have the capability to go and provide an implementation, I don't have the belief that this project is going to support it. historically held an extremely hard line on not doing exactly this kind of thing. So it's a bit like head spinny for me that suddenly there's 10 people working on this project, adding all kinds of functionality to it that frankly, it seems like it's in complete odds with what the project has been holding a hard line on for the last 2 years. So for me, it's new. I'm glad that there are additional people working on it. I think this implementation is bad. I won't use it. I understand that, like, I understand what you're trying to do. I think there's a solution that doesn't necessitate these comments, but
Okay, that's great. It's helpful feedback. I look forward to, I think if there's a lot of people who feel that way, then we probably won't continue to pursue it and look at other things. If there's other people that find it valuable, we'll probably continue.
What is the venue to communicate that? Is this the place?
To say you like it or don't like it? Sorry.
Yeah. You said like if people say that, which is just to say like,
I think
where's that communication happening?
It can communicate here. It can communicate on the SIG CLI list, conferences, right? Like face-to-faces, issues, PRs, blog posts, all these sorts of things, right? Like if someone writes a blog post that they like it and I see that, I don't need them to reach out to me personally.
Got it. Okay.
The answer to your other question, OpenAPI. The problem is not that this can't go in OpenAPI. OpenAPI supports extensions, so we can put anything we want in there. The question is, what version of OpenAPI should we use for this, right? Because the API for this particular resource may vary depending on what cluster you're using, right? Like, so the OpenAPI is tied to the server version.
Sure, yep.
Or the CRD version, right, for CRDs that are installed, right? And so which version of the OpenAPI do I use? Where do I get it? Does this mean I have to have a cluster with that CRD installed in order for me to work with this resource? Or is it downloaded as a side channel, in which case my tooling has to read some OpenAPI file that's packaged with this resource that isn't, so like there is a lot of challenges with having a separate schema, right, that there's no clear way of getting.
That to me feels like the actual problem to be solved, but I concede my point because I appreciate very much that you're doing this work and trying to make it better, because historically it's been very hard to get any changes into this project at all.
And so one thing to look at that's related to this is the Q language. I don't know if you see that. It's around unification, and it unifies schema and data. Mm-hmm. So the data itself has the schema defined through essentially constraints, and these constraints get unified. And then so you go from schema to data as you add more restrictive constraints in it. And so this is along that same vein of thinking of this is effectively similar in that notion, like there's constraint-ish stuff here, like the type, for instance, is on there. You could potentially put in here the enumeration set of enumerated values. So that would be another constraint that you could apply directly on the data, unifying schema and data that way. And field metadata. So there's a couple things going on here. It's both the substitutions, which you may or may not like. The other thing, which I didn't quite demonstrate, is just having metadata on fields generally. Like when you use customize and you have multiple bases and multiple patches applied, and you end up with this end result that has maybe several different opinion sources applied to it, and you try and say, why does each field have that? And why was that value chosen? And is it the correct one? Is actually challenging in my mind, and doesn't lend itself towards tools showing that information to folks. So having field metadata here with sort of a description of the source of this field and say, this was set by SRE, or this was set by dev, or this was set by this particular customization file that lives here. And then you could have tools, right, which bring this up, and then you can click on, for instance, that field, and it would bring up the customization file. So
that makes total sense to me, and as structured data as like an annotation as opposed to a comment that the set command could add to the resource. But again, I feel like potentially we're getting into the weeds here. But I see where you're going with it. I understand there's value in knowing who controls what and who's made changes. I just think that comments are not the solution. But
cool.
That's fine.
Well, look forward to more ideas on this, and I'm always open to something better.
Awesome.
We find it. Any other
Okay.
topics or questions?
I would want to cut this one at this point in time since we're almost at the top of the hour. I want to leave the minute for the stand-up. And I see that Eddie put together already 4 issues in the bug scrub section, so I'll probably want to get to that one as well. For stand-up, I see customize Kyum. I'm not sure if that's still you or someone else. Want to quickly cover that one?
Oh, I think we can just cut that. That was me, and it's just saying that we've developed a lot of YAML manipulation libraries and
Okay.
that are useful.
Okay, so with that, before I jump to the bug scrub, does anyone have any stand-ups that I want to share with the rest of the group? Okay, so with that, I'm gonna go to the bug scrub. Eddie pointed me at 4 issues if I'm looking correctly, counting correctly.
So honestly,
Well,
you could just start going down from like the latest issues in GitHub because that's where these are basically pulled from. So
I'll just go with the ones that you put together so that you, first of all, get the idea of what I'm looking most frequently, how I'm debugging stuff, and that should help you get the ball rolling, and we can continue on the next meetings. Does that make sense?
Yep, works for me.
Okay, cool. So the first one you put together is about kubectl label, which was not removing a label from a node. So in this particular case is, if a command is not working as it is expected, the first thing that I'm personally asking the reporter to do is you can ask them for a kubectl command with an increased verbosity level. If you ask for verbosity levels 7, 8, or up to 9, you're gonna get, I can't remember the exact numbering, but it's written somewhere down. 9 gives you everything up to the point where you're getting curl commands, and the request and the response, the lower levels are cutting some data. So I'm usually asking for the V9, and then you can see an actual request that's being sent over to the server, which in the case of a label command, it will be a patch command, which is what basically you did and asked the person to respond. So I literally ask for usually the patch to see the request data that is being sent over to the server.
So specifically for this one, that link above is his V8 debug output. So that's where I pulled that snippet from.
Oh, so this is from his output?
Yeah,
Okay.
he linked it in his issue.
So if I'm looking at this correctly, at some point in time in we had a problem with null values, which were not parsed properly. He's mentioning a client of 1.14.2. It would be worthy if you could try with a newer version and see if the problem still persists. I do remember that at some point in time in the past, we had some issues with nulls in the APIs and that they were not handled properly. It might be one of those cases. So either he can try a newer version and see if the problem persists, or eventually we can go back. Although usually we try to fix stuff in the newer version.
So my specific question for this one was, it looks like kubectl put together the request quite correctly and got a proper response. So would this be something that's punted to like API server or something else, or?
It might be a problem with the server, honestly, because if the kubectl put together the request correctly and it was ignored on the server, trying to see if we have Oh, he was using this one. No, here. So that's interesting because it looks like I need to get this thing into a proper, because the response body will contain the full dump of the object. I'll need to get into the we have it truncated, of course. So I need to see this one and see if the output has that one. Definitely worthy to always check the output and see, but both the request and the response from the server. Let me see if what he sent in the response still has the submariner. So if I'm looking correctly, I don't see that label anymore after in the response body from the server. It does not have the library, the label that it was trying to remove. So the question is, if something happened in between after he labeled and he got the he read the labels once again. It looks like there might be some additional process that might be modifying the labels afterwards, because the response from the server, if you look carefully, does not have the label set, which means the patch was put together correctly, and the response from the server clearly indicates that it was applied on the server. So it's more about what happened in between after he labeled it and then got back. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Because between this labeling, and this get, something might have changed the label back. Because if you look in the output that he put together, the response from the server does not have that label. So I would ask for this kind of additional debugging information before passing in either direction. I see that you already asked in the ZSH completion syntax problem. I'll probably don't say too much about it, but I see Sean already tagged it as a problem. I mean, the majority of the template for the ZSH or bash completions are in one of the files, so it's reasonably simple to add that kind of fix into the into that bash template that we have.
So for this one, I think that the user just misunderstood what was going on here. So this is an example of one that I think could just be closed if there's no reply.
Yeah, if it's just a misunderstanding how he should inject the bash, then I'm perfectly fine with closing it. If you see that the actual output of this is coming from kubectl completion command, then we might want to fix the actual template so that it does produce a valid output. Okay. Okay, the next one. This is an interesting one. So after kubectl run, it should wait for creation of the first pod. What is interesting though is this particular line. After he invoked the kubectl run command, the response from the server is that the deployment was actually removed. And that's why he's getting a not found from the server. The next invocation is actually working properly. My question is, what happened here that the pod got removed and not created? It should get removed only if it fails, but not by default. So something has happened in between here. It would be definitely worthy to try ask for -v output and get what happens in between. Although, if I understand correctly, this is happening infrequently in the command. So that will be the approach that I would take. Okay, and the last one is with regards to can I command. Oh, that's an interesting. It might be that the it might be that the role check that we have, I can't remember the exact resource, that is being created when you pass the name is not constructed correctly, or it is constructed so that the server gives us a wrong answer. It will be valuable to get the output. And if it's something that is failing in the current, is happening in the current master, it should be a pretty hopefully easy fix for someone interested in helping with the kubectl. Does that make sense? Okay. I think that's all for today. Thank you very much, and see you all in 4 weeks, actually.
Yeah, and thanks for that bug scrub idea. That was really great.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks,
for
Eddie.
making this so accessible to come to everyone.
Bye, Tyler.
Bye.